They pointed weapons at an old man. They tased his wife while she carried groceries. But with just 5 quiet words, he made a heavily armed SWAT team freeze in place. What kind of man could stop chaos without raising his voice? And what did it cost him to stand his ground that way? This is the story of Jack Sullivan, a man who proved that true strength doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from knowing exactly when to stay silent and when to speak. Jack Sullivan was the man you called when your lawnmower sputtered or when your old pickup refused to start. Neighbors on Maplewood Drive knew him as the quiet fixer, the one with an open garage door most weekends, where the smell of oil mixed with the sound of classic rock drifting over neatly trimmed lawns. At 69, Jack's hands weren't as steady as they once were, but his mind remained sharp, every mechanical puzzle triggering muscle memory honed over decades. He preferred it this way. Most of Maplewood Drive didn't know about his past. The 28 years of service in units that didn't officially exist, the missions that left no footprints, the medals tucked into a battered shoebox buried deep in a closet. Only Margaret, his wife of 44 years, knew everything. She had stayed through it all. The endless deployments, the silent nights, the slow, grinding effort of becoming someone new after the wars had ended. Their modest ranch-style home had become their sanctuary. Jack volunteered at the VFW on Thursdays, built wheelchair ramps for disabled veterans on Saturdays, and spent Tuesdays teaching auto shop at the local high school, taking in the kids other teachers had long given up on. Wednesday afternoons were quiet, just the way Jack liked them. That particular Wednesday in September carried the first hints of autumn. Jack was beneath Mrs. Whitmore's aging Buick, changing the oil as a favor. Margaret had gone out for groceries. Wednesday was senior discount day at Palmer's Market. The first sign that something was wrong came with the sound of tires, too fast, too sharp for their sleepy street. Jack rolled out from under the Buick just in time to see the first black SUV screech to a halt across his driveway. 3 more vehicles followed. Men in tactical gear, faces masked behind helmets and shields, spilled out, weapons raised. Police! Everyone on the ground. Jack rose slowly, hands open and visible, engine grease still staining his fingers. "There must be some mistake," he began, his voice calm. A rifle barrel snapped up to meet his chest, cutting off any further words. "Down on the ground, now!" Jack complied, lowering himself to the concrete with a grunt, the rough surface scraping his cheek. Boots thudded around him. Hands, rough and unyielding, zip-tied his wrists behind his back. He heard one voice shout, "Secure the house!" And that's when Margaret's car turned into the driveway. She stepped out, grocery bags in both arms, confusion crossing her face. "Jack, what's happening?" 3 officers immediately pivoted, weapons pointed at her small, hunched figure. "Drop the bags. Hands where we can see them." Margaret froze, the bags still clutched to her chest. Her voice trembled. "Please, I'm just non-compliant," barked a young officer, voice sharp with adrenaline. Final warning. Jack tried to lift his head, tried to speak, but the boot against his back ground harder into him. He saw Margaret start to lower the bags, but her hands, riddled with arthritis, couldn't move fast enough. The taser fired. Margaret's body jerked violently, grocery bags exploding in a chaos of eggs, apples, and milk across the driveway. She collapsed to the ground, a broken doll. Jack didn't scream. He didn't fight. Years of training kicked in. He focused. He found the officer with the command insignia and, through gritted teeth, said 5 quiet words. "Call General David Cole, now." For a moment, nothing happened. The SWAT team maintained their positions. One of the younger officers scoffed loudly. "That's supposed to scare us, old man." But Jack didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the commander, steady and cold. "This is 3865 Maplewood Drive," he said, his voice razor-sharp despite the chaos. "You want 3865 Maplewood Avenue, different zip code." The commander hesitated. Doubt flickered across his face. Jack pressed on, left inside pocket, "Look but don't touch." Slowly, cautiously, the commander approached, reaching into Jack's jacket and pulling out a worn metallic badge. Black Eagle insignia. High-tier clearance. A symbol that even men trained for violence recognized without needing explanation. The entire world seemed to pause. A low whisper, almost reverent, came from an older SWAT officer. "Sir, that's Black Protocol clearance." The commander's demeanor cracked. He barked for a medic. barked to cut Jack's restraints, barked for address verification. The noise surged, then fell away, leaving only the heavy breathing of men who realized they had just made a catastrophic mistake. Jack knelt beside Margaret, checking her pulse with fingers that hadn't forgotten how to save lives. They had come hunting a criminal. Instead, they had assaulted the wife of a man whose name lived in files so secret they might as well have been myths. And all it had taken to stop them was 5 words. Jack knelt on the rough concrete, the pain in his knees distant compared to the cold horror rising inside him. Margaret's body lay slack against his chest, her head lolled at an unnatural angle. The medic arrived, his hands moving quickly but not fast enough for Jack's liking. Every second stretched long and taut, the autumn breeze carrying the smell of spilled milk, bruised fruit, and something metallic he couldn't quite place. Margaret's pulse flickered against Jack's fingertips, faint, struggling, her breathing shallow. He could feel it through her ribs, fragile and incomplete. The world around them had shifted. Where once there had been the hum of suburban life, dogs barking, sprinklers ticking rhythmically, now there was only silence and static. Radios crackled, boots shuffled, but no one spoke above a whisper. Jack kept his head down, focusing on Margaret, refusing to let rage blind him. His old instincts itched under his skin, the urge to seize control, to bark orders, to revert to the man he had spent years burying. But he wouldn't give them that. Not here, not today. He heard snippets of their frantic communications, confirming, wrong address, different zip code, permission to disengage. The SWAT commander, a man who had exuded absolute certainty minutes ago, now hovered nearby, stripped of confidence. His rifle dangled uselessly at his side. The words he tried to find wouldn't come. How do you apologize for terrorizing the innocent? How do you erase the sight of an old woman collapsing under volts of misplaced fear? Jack could have demanded answers, could have demanded blood. He stayed silent. Across the street, more neighbors gathered behind hedges and porches, phones recording. The whispers grew, a low, accusatory hum. Jack caught snippets. Is that Jack? They tased Margaret? My God, what are they doing? The young officer who had fired the taser stood frozen, a figure carved from shame. His hands shook at his sides. His gaze darted anywhere but toward Jack and Margaret. Jack finally looked up, meeting the commander's eyes across the broken driveway. You came armed for war, Jack said, his voice low and even, against people who bake casseroles for their neighbors. The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. They carved through the air, cutting cleaner than any bullet. The commander opened his mouth, trying again. We had intel. It was credible. High-risk suspect. You had adrenaline, Jack corrected, rising slowly to his full height. His back protested, years of old injuries flaring to life. And you had fear, and you had the wrong address. A fresh wave of unease swept through the tactical team. Some officers lowered their weapons. A few removed their helmets. The medic finished stabilizing Margaret and glanced up, worry pinching his brow. Sir, the medic said quietly to Jack, she needs transport. Heart's unstable. We can call an ambulance. Jack shook his head. No ambulance. I'll take her myself. Please, the medic pleaded softly. Let us do something right. Jack hesitated, then nodded once. Carefully, reverently, they lifted Margaret onto a stretcher. Jack hovered close, never more than a hand's span from her side, a silent sentinel. Behind them, the SWAT team unraveled. Radios squawked. The older officer, the one who had recognized the badge, whispered urgently to his commander. Jack didn't need to hear it to know what was being said. His name was out there now, spiraling up the chain of command like a flare. Names like Jack Sullivan weren't supposed to exist outside of shadows, but even shadows could burn if dragged into the daylight. The neighbor filming across the street whispered audibly to his phone, broadcasting live. They tased a veteran's wife. A war hero. They didn't even check the address. And the world, Jack knew, was already watching. As Margaret was loaded gently into the SWAT vehicle, repurposed now as a makeshift ambulance, Jack turned back to the young officer who had fired the taser. Their eyes met. The young man crumbled inside. Tears filled his eyes, not just from fear of consequence, but from something deeper. A shame that would follow him long after this day ended. Jack didn't speak hatred. Didn't raise his voice. He simply said, loud enough for everyone to hear, respect isn't fear. Authority isn't cruelty. The young officer flinched visibly, the truth hitting harder than any reprimand. Jack walked beside Margaret as they drove slowly toward the street's exit, the SWAT convoy parting around him like a tide. No one moved to stop him. No one dared. From behind him came the whispers, the hurried calls up the chain, the frantic attempts to contain a situation that had already slipped beyond control. Jack didn't look back. He knew what came next. The gears of officialdom grinding into motion, the justifications, the reports rewritten, the apologies phrased carefully to avoid admitting fault. He had lived long enough to see institutions protect themselves first, but he had also lived long enough to know that sometimes silence could be louder than sirens. Sometimes standing still could be the most devastating resistance of all. The medic glanced back at him once, meeting Jack's eyes. No words passed between them. None were needed. Because in that brief look, Jack saw it. Recognition, respect, regret. The weight of what had happened would not leave these men quickly. And Jack Sullivan, who had once moved unseen through wars that never made the news, had just fought another kind of battle. Not with weapons, but with dignity. And he had already won. The SWAT convoy lingered awkwardly along Maplewood Drive, engines rumbling low, officers milling without purpose. Jack sat silently inside the makeshift ambulance, Margaret's frail hand resting in his own. Her pulse had steadied somewhat, but every now and then her body shivered, a deep, involuntary tremor that twisted Jack's gut with helpless anger. Out beyond the window, the scene unfolded in slow, painful detail. The commander barked clipped orders into his radio, trying to salvage control. Officers clustered in small, uncertain groups, stripped of their earlier bravado. Neighbors continued to film from porches and behind curtains, the lens of judgment sharper than any official review board. And then the black SUV appeared. It moved without lights, without fanfare, but somehow the air itself seemed to tighten as it approached. A simple government vehicle, unmarked save for the subtle sheen of military-grade armor beneath its paint. It pulled up smoothly behind the last SWAT truck. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. General David Cole needed no introduction. Though he wore no uniform, just a crisp charcoal suit, his bearing announced him louder than any insignia ever could. His hair, silver and regulation short, caught the afternoon light. His eyes, cold and sharp as a whetted blade, swept the street in one precise scan. The SWAT commander straightened instinctively, but before he could move, General Cole fixed him with a look that rooted the man in place. Without a word, Cole moved toward the Sullivan house. Jack saw him coming through the window. He squeezed Margaret's hand once, gently, then rose to meet the man at the door. They faced each other. Two men who carried the weight of too many invisible wars. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with crisp precision, General Cole raised his hand in a formal salute. Jack hesitated half a beat before returning it, slow but steady, his first salute in nearly 15 years. "They told me you were dead," Cole said at last, his voice low. "Only professionally," Jack replied, a hint of something wry behind the words. Cole's gaze flickered past Jack to where Margaret lay resting, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. His jaw tightened. His eyes, cold and professional a moment before, now glinted with something personal. Fury, perhaps. Shame. When he turned back to the assembled SWAT officers, his presence shifted, from old friend to force of nature. "This man," Cole said, voice carrying across the street without needing to shout, "wrote the civilian engagement protocols you train under. The same ones you violated today." A stunned silence fell. Some officers lowered their eyes, others paled visibly. The commander, struggling, tried to speak. "Sir, we were executing a high-risk warrant." "You executed incompetence," Cole snapped, his voice slicing through the afternoon air. "You escalated without verification. You deployed force against unarmed civilians, against a man who once briefed national security advisors on battlefield ethics." He stepped forward, deliberate, until he stood inches from the commander. "You humiliated a national asset," Cole said, each word weighted and deliberate, "and you disgraced every principle you swore to uphold." The commander looked like he wanted to sink into the earth. Cole turned sharply. The officer who deployed a taser without clear and present threat stepped forward. There was a beat of awful stillness. Then the young man, pale, trembling, stumbled forward, removing his vest, his sidearm, and finally his badge, laying them in silence on the hood of the nearest vehicle. "You are relieved," Cole said. "Effective immediately. Report to your captain for reassignment pending review." The young officer didn't argue. He didn't even raise his eyes. He simply walked to a patrol car, opened the door, and sat heavily inside, head bowed. Jack watched it all, saying nothing. Cole approached him once more, lowering his voice. "They'll try to bury this," he said. "Internal reviews, procedural whitewashes, maybe an apology in private. Maybe not even that." Jack said nothing, his face unreadable. Cole withdrew a sealed envelope from inside his jacket. He offered it to Jack. "This contains a formal apology and reinstatement of your clearances should you wish to come back. We could use you, Jack." Jack looked at the envelope but made no move to take it. "The world doesn't change, David," he said, voice almost gentle. "Just the uniforms. Just the weapons." He glanced back through the open door, at Margaret resting on the stretcher, at the life he had built, quiet and simple. "My service is here now," Jack said. "With her. With kids who need carburetors fixed, not wars fought." Cole studied him for a long moment, then nodded, a slow gesture heavy with respect. He placed the envelope carefully on the porch railing. "The offer stands," he said simply. Without another word, General David Cole turned and walked back toward his vehicle. The SWAT team, still frozen in the yard, parted instinctively to let him pass. Jack stood there a moment longer, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. He watched as Cole's SUV pulled away, silent as it had arrived. Only then did Jack step back inside, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. Outside, the SWAT team remained, still rooted, still silent. The reckoning had passed. The consequences had just begun. The days that followed moved slowly, like wading through deep water. Margaret remained at home, under doctor's orders, her bruises darkening before they faded, her heart carefully monitored. She didn't speak much about that afternoon, not about the pain, nor the humiliation. But Jack saw it anyway, in the way her hands trembled slightly when reaching for the light switch, in how she double-checked the locks at night. Jack stayed by her side, a silent anchor. He made her tea, read her books, and sat through long stretches where neither of them said a word. Words were unnecessary. Healing had its own language, slow, patient, deliberate. Outside, life on Maplewood Drive shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. Patrol cars began slowing when passing the Sullivan home, officers nodding respectfully from their windows. Some neighbors left quiet gifts on the porch, a bouquet of wildflowers, a box of fresh scones, a simple handwritten note, "Thank you for your service, we're sorry." The world beyond their street rippled wider. The video of the incident, recorded from Mr. Whitaker's porch, had gone viral despite initial attempts to contain it. News anchors debated it, columnists cited it, veterans groups rallied around it. Politicians tried, awkwardly, to frame it without admitting fault. The footage told its own story. An old man, zip-tied in his driveway, watching helplessly as his wife crumpled under the weight of official fear. A man who stopped an armed unit with just 5 quiet words. Jack refused all interview requests. Reporters called, knocked, mailed letters. He ignored them all. His war had never been for headlines. Margaret, slowly regaining her strength, found solace in small things, sitting on the porch in the late afternoon sun, knitting with careful stitches, tending to her flowers. Jack repaired her favorite rocking chair, sanding it smooth, oiling it until it gleamed. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the incident, Police Chief Thomas Gray requested a private meeting. Jack agreed, reluctantly, on one condition: no media. No speeches. No grandstanding. They sat across from each other in Jack's living room, Margaret quietly knitting nearby, the faint smell of motor oil and coffee lingering in the air. Chief Gray cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," he began. Jack said nothing. He simply waited. The chief fumbled onward. "The officer responsible has been reassigned indefinitely. The team's undergoing mandatory retraining, and, effective immediately, we're implementing a new protocol based on your example." Jack's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The 5 words protocol," Gray said, shifting in his seat. "Every officer will now be trained to de-escalate using verbal authority first. Verifying addresses before engagement is now a triple confirmation process. Civilian dignity procedures will be mandatory reading for all ranks." Jack nodded once. Not approval, just acknowledgement. Thank you for not making it worse, Gray added after a pause. You could have sued. You could have destroyed careers. Jack leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm. I wasn't interested in revenge, he said. I was interested in being heard. Gray met his gaze, and for a long moment there was something almost human between them. Not friendship, but understanding. The chief stood to leave, offering his hand. Jack hesitated, then shook it once, briefly. After the door closed behind Gray, Jack returned to the porch where Margaret sat, the sun warming the worn wood beneath their feet. He didn't tell her what had been said. He didn't need to. She knew. They sat in silence, listening to the world breathe around them. The distant sound of children playing, a lawnmower humming 2 streets over, the familiar clink of a bicycle bell. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't victory. It was something quieter, something harder earned, respect, rebuilt from ashes. Across the street, Officer Daniels, a young rookie new to the beat, paused his patrol car. He stepped out, walking carefully to the edge of their driveway. In his hands, he carried a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper. Jack rose, moving to meet him. Sir, Daniels said, offering the package. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed his nervousness. It's from the academy. They asked me to deliver it personally. Jack unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed letter, an official statement from the academy, now part of the training curriculum, titled simply, 5 words, Leadership Through Restraint. At the bottom, in small typed font, it read, Dedicated to Jack Sullivan, for reminding us that true authority is never loud. Jack looked up, meeting Daniels' earnest eyes. He gave a small nod. Thank you, officer, he said. Daniels hesitated. Then, with a touch of youthful awkwardness, saluted. Jack didn't return the salute. Instead, he extended his hand. Jack, he said simply. Just Jack. Daniels shook it, his relief almost visible. As the rookie departed, Jack returned to the porch, setting the framed letter down beside Margaret's knitting basket. She reached over, squeezing his hand once without a word. In that simple gesture, Jack felt the world shift. Not loudly, not completely, but enough. Enough for hope. Enough for healing. Enough to believe that sometimes even the smallest acts of dignity could ripple outward, changing things far beyond what anyone could see. They sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors neither war nor anger could ever erase. 3 months later, the neighborhood had returned to its rhythms. Children chasing soccer balls down sidewalks, sprinklers clicking lazily in the late afternoon sun, porch lights flickering on as the evenings grew shorter. But something invisible had shifted. Every patrol car slowed respectfully when passing the Sullivan home. Officers now made a point to nod first, a small but unmistakable gesture of deference. Even the youngest rookies, fresh from the academy, seemed to understand that this street, this driveway, carried a weight beyond their training. Margaret, with her quiet resilience, had healed slowly. The bruises faded long before the ache did. Yet she stood taller now when they shopped at Palmer's Market, refusing to let fear write the ending to her story. Jack returned to his routines, oil changes, VFW meetings, auto shop classes, but the way people looked at him had changed. Not with awe, not with pity, with respect. The kind that came from understanding, not from headlines. Across town, larger changes had taken root. The police department, under intense public pressure and quiet federal suggestion, had formally adopted the 5 words protocol. Officers now trained in de-escalation techniques rooted in respect, verification, and civilian dignity. Mistakes, while still inevitable, were no longer brushed aside. The footage from that afternoon, Jack standing still amid chaos, refusing to be reduced to anger, had become required viewing at academies across the state. No one ever mentioned Jack and Margaret by name at press conferences. They didn't have to. The story had taken on a life larger than paperwork. Once, Jack found a small black SUV idling quietly outside his home. A man in plain clothes left a package on his porch. No note, no explanation. Inside, Jack found an old, restored photograph. It showed a younger version of himself, standing shoulder to shoulder with others whose faces were deliberately blurred. Men who, like him, had been asked to serve and then to disappear. He smiled slightly, a private acknowledgement, and tucked the photograph into Margaret's bookshelf without a word. Small reminders arrived now and then. A book, a good bottle of whiskey, a rare part for an engine he'd been restoring. Always anonymous, always silent. Jack understood. Gratitude didn't need speeches. Not from the kinds of men who knew how heavy true silence could be. Late one afternoon, a rookie officer's cruiser broke down just 2 houses down. Jack noticed before the young man even radioed for help. Grabbing his toolkit instinctively, Jack crossed the street. The rookie looked up, startled, then visibly relaxed. Together they worked beneath the hood, Jack guiding with quiet patience, the rookie listening intently. After an hour, the engine coughed back to life. The rookie, still kneeling by the open hood, hesitated before asking, "Sir, at the academy, they tell us you could have ended careers that day, that you had the power. Why didn't you?" Jack tightened one last bolt, wiped his hands on a rag, and leaned against the car casually. "Because revenge doesn't fix broken engines," he said simply. "And it sure as hell doesn't fix broken people." The rookie absorbed the words in silence. Later that week, a local reporter caught Jack outside the VFW, microphone extended. "Mr. Sullivan," she pressed, "why didn't you fight back when they attacked your wife? You had the training, you had the right. Why just 5 words instead of action?" Jack looked directly into the camera, his face calm, lined by years not of bitterness, but of knowing. "Because 5 words are louder than fear," he said, "and sometimes the strongest position isn't the one where you're standing over someone else. It's the one where you're standing your ground." He turned then, walking back to his truck, the interview abandoned without drama. The reporter stood blinking, unsure how to fill the silence he left behind. Jack didn't care. He had said enough. Some truths didn't need repetition. They just needed to be lived. As fall deepened, Jack and Margaret settled back into the life they had built. Not grand, not easy, but real. Jack continued fixing engines, teaching forgotten kids how to listen to the heartbeats of machines. And sometimes, when he caught sight of a patrol car slowing respectfully at the curb, or a young officer tipping his cap before driving on, he allowed himself a quiet smile. Not pride, not vindication, something better. The knowledge that sometimes change didn't arrive with banners or speeches. Sometimes it came on quiet feet, carried by people who had seen the worst and chose to build better anyway. One broken engine, one repaired trust, one life at a time. And always, always standing ground, not with fists, but with the steady, unshakable weight of dignity. If you believe real strength speaks in restraint, type 1 in the comments. If you believe respect should come before assumptions, type 2. And if stories like Jack Sullivan's remind you that dignity can still win, subscribe to Steelheart Stories, where true courage is quiet but never invisible.